He had 11 minutes left to live, and the only name Caleb Walker whispered was not a lawyer's, not a priest's, not even his own mother's. It was Rex. The final room at Red Valley Correctional sat at the end of a narrow hallway washed in pale fluorescent light, the kind of light that made every face look older and every silence feel official. Rain tapped against the high windows in soft, uneven beats, sliding down the glass like something trying to get in. Caleb sat on a metal chair with his hands resting quietly in his lap, wearing a plain state-issued shirt and cotton pants that seemed too light for the cold. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, white, with close-cropped brown hair and the tired blue eyes of a man who had spent years being looked at but never truly seen. Once, those eyes had watched over Marines in desert heat and police officers on midnight calls. Once, they had searched alleys, schools, back roads, and empty fields beside a German shepherd who trusted him more than any living soul. Now they watched a clock above the door. 5:49 a.m. Warden Margaret Hale stood near the wall, holding a clipboard she had already checked 3 times. She was a careful woman, not cruel, but trained by years of procedure to keep her feelings folded away. Beside her waited Chaplain Thomas Reed, his Bible closed between both hands, his thumb pressed against the worn leather, as if holding a small door shut. No one spoke for a long time. The air smelled faintly of floor wax, old coffee, and rain-soaked wool from the guards' coats hanging outside. Caleb had refused the final meal. He had refused the television interview. He had refused to curse the people who had sent him here. When the warden asked if he wanted to make a final statement, he had looked past her, toward the locked door, and said in a voice rough from disuse, "Let me see Rex." Warden Hale had hesitated then. Not because the request was impossible, but because it was too human. "Officer Walker," she said softly, using the title no one in the building used anymore. "The dog is old now. He may not be the way you remember him." Caleb lowered his eyes, and for the first time that morning, his calm nearly broke. A small tremor moved through his jaw. "Neither am I," he said. Outside the room, a phone rang once, then stopped. Somewhere down the corridor, a heavy door opened with a slow metallic sigh. Caleb turned toward the sound before anyone else did. His breathing changed. Not much. Just enough for the chaplain to notice. Just enough for the warden to look up from her clipboard. From the far end of the hall came the faint rhythm of claws touching polished concrete, slow but steady, each step carrying 7 years of waiting. Caleb closed his eyes. In the gray hush before dawn, with 11 minutes left, and the rain still tapping like a prayer no one had finished, the dog who was not supposed to remember him was coming home. Rex appeared first as a shadow at the far end of the corridor, low against the morning light, moving slowly beside a young handler who held the leash with both hands as if he knew the dog did not truly belong to him. The German shepherd was older than the photographs in Caleb's memory. His muzzle had gone silver, the dark saddle along his back was threaded with gray, and one hip carried a stiffness that made each step careful. But his ears were still sharp. His amber eyes were still clear. And when he entered that hallway, the air itself seemed to change. Guards who had stood through years of procedure lowered their voices without being told. Warden Hale straightened, but her face softened before she could stop it. Chaplain Reed opened his eyes and looked toward the door, as though he had heard a hymn from a room no one else could see. Caleb did not stand. He was not allowed to. He only turned his head slowly, afraid that if he moved too quickly the moment might vanish. Rex stopped 10 feet away from the final room. His nose lifted. The handler whispered, "Easy, boy." But Rex was not uneasy. He was listening with his whole body. The scent of floor wax, rainwater, cotton fabric, old concrete, and nervous men filled the narrow hall. Underneath all of it was something older. Salt from skin. Faint cedar soap. The worn leather of a man who once drove patrol at 3 in the morning with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near a dog's shoulder. Rex took one step. Then another. Caleb's lips parted, but for a second no sound came out. All the years of appeals, all the nights behind the door, all the letters returned unopened, seemed to press against his throat. Finally, he spoke the name again, barely above a breath. Rex. The dog froze. His ears lifted higher. A tremor passed through his frame, so small most people missed it. Caleb did not. He remembered that tremor from thunderstorm nights, from hospital parking lots, from the first week after they had both survived the warehouse and neither one could sleep. Rex stared at him, and the room held its breath. Then the dog moved forward, not running, not leaping, but walking with the solemn certainty of a soul returning to the only place it had ever been understood. Caleb lowered himself as far as the chair allowed. His hands shook now. He did not hide it. Rex reached him and pressed his nose against Caleb's palm. One breath. Then another. The old dog closed his eyes. Caleb bent over him, forehead touching the fur between his ears. The handler looked away. Warden Hale blinked hard. For a moment, there was no prison, no clock, no witnesses behind glass. There was only a man and the German shepherd who had carried his silence for 7 years. But then Rex opened his eyes. His body changed. The softness disappeared from his shoulders. His tail stiffened. His head turned away from Caleb, toward the observation window. Behind the glass stood the people who had come to watch the ending. Among them was Detective Aaron Miles, gray suit dry beneath a black overcoat, hands folded around a leather bag. Rex stared at him. The hallway felt cold again. A low sound rose from the dog's chest, quiet, controlled, and unmistakably certain. Caleb lifted his head. He knew that sound. It was not fear. It was recognition. Detective Aaron Miles had chosen the far corner behind the observation glass, where the overhead light did not fall directly on his face. He had always known how to stand near a thing without seeming part of it. In court, he had worn grief like a clean uniform, answering every question with a lowered voice and tired eyes. He had called Caleb Walker a brother. He had said the warehouse case broke everyone involved. He had said Rex became confused after the smoke and alarms, too shaken to be trusted. People believed him because Aaron knew the language of sorrow. He knew when to pause. He knew when to look away. But Rex did not listen to voices the way people did. Rex remembered what people carried beneath them. The old German shepherd stood beside Caleb now, every muscle still, his amber eyes locked on the man behind the glass. His growl was low enough that it seemed to come from the floor itself. The young handler tightened the leash. Rex, easy. Caleb lifted one hand, not to command the dog, but to steady the room. Do not pull him back, he said. Warden Hale turned sharply toward him. Officer Walker. Caleb kept his eyes on Rex. Please. The word landed softly, but it carried 7 years of buried weight. Behind the glass, Aaron shifted his leather bag from one hand to the other. It was a small movement. Almost nothing. But Rex saw it. His ears angled forward. His nose twitched once, then again. The room seemed to narrow around that bag, around Aaron's fingers, around the faint scent of rain, cologne, and old leather drifting through the ventilation seam beneath the glass partition. Caleb felt his pulse slow in a way that frightened him. He had not felt that kind of focus since patrol. Since the two of them moved together through dark streets in Savannah, Georgia, reading the world by breath and shadow. A memory rose without warning. Rex at his left knee. A silent warehouse. Aaron's voice over the radio, too calm. Then the missing collar tag, gone from Rex's neck when Caleb woke in the hospital, vanished along with the body camera backup no one could find. Caleb had spent years telling lawyers that the dog knew. Everyone heard desperation. No one heard truth. Rex stepped forward until the leash drew tight. His growl faded into silence, which was worse. Caleb knew that silence. It came before a find. It came when Rex had locked onto something hidden under floorboards, inside glove compartments, behind locked doors. Chaplain Reed whispered, Lord have mercy. Warden Hale did not move. Her clipboard hung forgotten at her side. Aaron gave a thin smile through the glass, the kind meant for people, not dogs. This is unnecessary, he said, his voice muffled but clear through the speaker. The animal is reacting to stress, Rex answered by sitting down. Perfectly. Deliberately. His old body squared toward Aaron as if the final room had become a courtroom, and the dog had taken the witness stand. Caleb stared at him, his throat tightening. Long ago, he had taught Rex a quiet signal for danger that could not be named. Sit. Hold. Wait for the hidden thing to reveal itself. Caleb leaned close to the dog's ear, his voice no more than a breath. You still remember, partner? Rex did not look back. Aaron's smile disappeared. The clock clicked to 5:53 a.m. 7 minutes remained, and for the first time in years, Caleb Walker was not the one being watched. Aaron Miles was. Caleb had not spoken that command in 7 years, and when it rose to his mouth, it felt less like memory than prayer. He looked at Rex, at the silver around his muzzle, at the scar hidden beneath the thick fur near his left shoulder, and for one breath he was not in Red Valley Correctional anymore. He was back under low savanna clouds, standing outside a closed warehouse with rain running down his collar, one hand resting above Rex's harness while the city held its breath around them. Back then, when a room was too quiet, when a suspect was too calm, when a story smelled wrong before anyone could prove why, Caleb would lean close and whisper the private phrase they had built between them. Rex never needed more. Caleb swallowed, his throat dry. The clock above the door clicked again. 5:54 a.m. 6 minutes. Warden Hale's voice came carefully from behind him. What are you doing? Caleb did not take his eyes off the dog. What I should have been allowed to do in court. The handler looked uncertain, young enough to believe rules were stronger than truth. He glanced at the warden, waiting. Rex remained seated, body square, gaze fixed on Aaron Miles through the glass. Aaron's face had gone pale beneath the controlled expression he was trying to keep. His leather bag hung at his side, now gripped too tightly. Caleb leaned down until his lips were near Rex's ear. His voice was almost nothing. Find the lie. Rex moved before the last word had finished. Not fast. Not wild. With purpose. The handler stumbled one step, then followed as Warden Hale lifted a hand, stopping the guards before they could interfere. Rex crossed the short space to the observation glass, nose low, tracing the seam where air slipped beneath the partition. He sniffed once, then turned sharply toward the side door that connected the witness room to the hall. Aaron stepped back. This is absurd, he said through the speaker, but the words no longer sounded polished. They sounded thin. Rex pressed his nose to the bottom of the door and gave one firm bark. The sound cracked through the final room like a gavel. Warden Hale looked at the chaplain, then at Caleb, then at the clock. Procedure lived in her bones, but something older stirred behind her eyes. Open the witness room door, she said. A guard hesitated. Ma'am, we are under final protocol. Her voice lowered. Open it. The lock buzzed. The side door swung inward with a soft mechanical click. Cold air moved between the rooms. Aaron stood just inside, his shoulders stiff, his bag held close to his coat. Rex stepped through and stopped 3 feet from him. He did not lunge. He did not bare his teeth. He only lifted his nose toward the bag and held perfectly still. That stillness frightened Aaron more than noise would have. Emily Carter, Caleb's former attorney, was standing among the witnesses, her gray coat damp from the rain, her eyes red from a night of failed calls and unanswered motions. She looked from the dog to Aaron's hand. Detective, she said slowly, what is in the bag? Aaron forced a laugh. Personal items. Rex lowered his head, touched the leather with his nose, then looked back at Caleb. It was the old signal. Found. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. Not from relief. From the ache of being believed too late. Ask him to open it, he said. Aaron shook his head. No. And in that one small word, every person in the room heard the first crack in the story that had buried Caleb Walker for 7 years. The word no seemed to hang in the air longer than any confession could have. Aaron Miles had spent 7 years answering questions with steady hands, but now those hands would not obey him. The leather bag trembled slightly against his coat. Rex saw it. Caleb saw it. Emily Carter saw it too, and something sharp awakened in her tired face. She stepped forward, careful not to startle the old German shepherd, her voice calm but carrying through both rooms. Detective Miles, this man has less than 6 minutes before the state completes a sentence based on your testimony. Open the bag. Aaron looked toward Warden Hale, hoping procedure would rescue him. For a moment, the warden said nothing. Her eyes moved to the clock, then to Caleb, then to Rex, who stood with his nose aimed at the leather as if the truth itself had a scent. Rain clicked softly against the high windows. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere beyond the corridor, a guard cleared his throat and then fell silent again. At last, Warden Hale spoke. Place the bag on the table. Aaron's mouth tightened. You do not have authority to search my property. Emily did not look away from him. Then hold it closed and live with everyone in this room knowing why. That was the first time Caleb heard fear in Aaron's breathing. Not panic. Not surrender. Just the faint break of a man realizing that a locked door can open from the inside. Aaron set the bag on the small witness table. His fingers worked the buckle slowly. The leather made a dry creaking sound. Rex leaned forward, but the handler kept the leash loose now, trusting what none of them fully understood. Inside the bag were ordinary things at first. A folded newspaper. A pair of reading glasses. A black umbrella sleeve. A worn folder marked with case notes. Then Rex gave one sharp bark and nudged the side pocket with his muzzle. Aaron reached for the bag, but Emily's hand came down over the flap before his did. Not you, she said. Warden Hale nodded to a guard, who opened the pocket and removed a small object wrapped in a white handkerchief. It was no larger than a silver dollar, dulled by age, scratched around the edges, and hanging from a broken ring. Caleb stopped breathing. The room blurred. He knew that shape before the cloth even fell away. Rex knew it too. The old dog stepped closer and touched the metal with his nose, then gave a soft sound Caleb had not heard since the nights they drove home after long shifts, when the city was quiet and both of them were too tired to speak. Emily turned the object under the light. It was a canine collar tag from the Savannah Police Department, stamped with Rex's old unit number and Caleb Walker's name. The tag that had disappeared the night of the warehouse. The tag every report claimed had been lost in the confusion. Caleb's hand rose to his chest as if an old wound had suddenly remembered itself. That was on him, he said, his voice breaking. That was on Rex when they took him from me. Aaron shook his head too quickly. It was evidence. It was recovered later. Emily looked at him. Then why was it never logged? No answer came. Rex lifted one paw and scraped gently at the back of the tag, once, twice, 3 times. The small sound of claw against metal cut through the room. Emily turned it over. On the reverse side, beneath old scratches and tarnish, 3 numbers had been carved by a rough point long ago. 3. 1. 7. Caleb stared at them, and the years fell away. Locker 317. The hidden evidence room in Savannah. Rex had not just found a memory. He had brought them a map. Emily Carter held the collar tag under the fluorescent light as if it were a small piece of the sun pulled out of darkness. 3 numbers, cut crookedly into the metal, waited on the back. 317. Caleb could hear his own heartbeat now, slow and heavy, like boots crossing an empty hallway. He remembered that locker. Savannah Police Department Evidence Annex, basement level, east wall, 3rd row from the old furnace room. It had been used for overflow items in cases nobody wanted to reopen. Years ago, Caleb had filed 3 written requests to inspect it. Each request had come back denied, delayed, or lost. Aaron Miles had signed 2 of the responses himself. Emily looked up at Warden Hale. I need a phone. The warden's jaw tightened. The clock above the door moved to 5:55 in the morning. 5 minutes. Procedure was still there, surrounding them like iron rails, but now something else had entered the room. Not chaos. Not mercy. Evidence. Hale turned to the nearest guard. Bring the secure line. Aaron laughed once too softly. It came out dry. You cannot stop this with a scratch dog tag. Caleb did not answer him. Rex did. The old German shepherd stepped between Aaron and the table, not threatening, not loud, simply present, his body a wall made of memory. Aaron moved back half a step. The guard returned with a black corded phone, and Emily took it with hands that were steady only because they had no other choice. She called a number she knew by heart, the emergency clerk for federal stays, then another, then another. Her voice stayed even, but every word carried urgency. This is Attorney Emily Carter. I am at Red Valley Correctional with Caleb Walker. New physical evidence has surfaced minutes before sentence completion. I need Judge Whitmore on the line now. Silence followed. A transfer. A click. Rain ticking at the glass. Rex breathing. Caleb closed his eyes and saw the warehouse again, not the fear, not the confusion, but the small details grief had failed to erase. Rex lowering his head toward a steel door. Aaron saying the backup room was clear before anyone checked it. The missing tag. The missing recording. The way truth had stood beside him on 4 paws and still been called unreliable. Emily covered the receiver and turned to Aaron. Who had access to locker 317 after the warehouse case? Aaron looked at the floor. I do not remember. Warden Hale spoke before Emily could. Detective, this is not a courtroom, but I would choose your next sentence carefully. On the phone, a new voice came through, older, sharp with sleep and authority. Emily straightened. Your Honor, I am requesting an emergency pause and an immediate evidence preservation order for Savannah Police Department Locker 317. Caleb opened his eyes. He did not dare hope. Hope had punished him too many times. The judge asked for the basis. Emily lifted the collar tag. A missing canine identification tag belonging to Rex, former police dog assigned to Officer Caleb Walker, has just been found in the possession of the lead detective. It bears a carved locker number connected to the original case. The detective cannot explain why he has it. The line went quiet. Aaron's face drained of color. Rex turned his head toward Caleb, just once, as if to say the trail was still warm. Then Judge Whitmore spoke through the receiver, each word landing clean and bright in the room. No sentence is to proceed until that locker is opened under federal observation. For the first time in 7 years, time did not move toward Caleb. It stopped. The order moved through the room like a breath no one had known they were holding. Warden Hale lowered the phone slowly, then looked at the clock as if it had become a stranger. 5:56 in the morning. The minute hand still pointed forward, but its power had changed. Caleb remained seated, afraid that even standing too quickly might disturb the fragile mercy that had just entered the room. Rex stayed beside him, old shoulders rising and falling, amber eyes fixed on Aaron Miles with the patience of a witness who had waited longer than any man should ask of a dog. Emily Carter did not stop moving. She kept Judge Whitmore on the secure line while another call connected to the Savannah Police Department Evidence Annex. The speaker clicked, hissed, then filled with the distant sound of keys, radios, and hurried footsteps echoing in a basement more than 200 miles away. A federal marshal named Daniel Reeves came onto the line, his voice clipped and awake now. We are at the east wall. Locker 317 is still sealed. Emily closed her eyes for half a second. Open it on video. Warden Hale signaled to a guard, who turned the room monitor toward the table. The screen flickered, showed static, then a dim concrete basement washed in yellow light. Rows of lockers stood against the wall like silent graves for forgotten truth. A gloved hand reached toward a narrow gray door marked 317. The seal was old, edges curled, ink faded but unbroken. Aaron whispered something no one caught. Rex heard it. His ears tilted back. Caleb turned his head just enough to see Aaron's face. For 7 years, that face had lived in his nightmares as the face of a friend who looked sorry while closing every door. Now it looked smaller. The marshal cut the seal. The locker opened with a dull metal scrape that seemed to travel all the way from Savannah into the final room. Inside sat a canvas evidence pouch, a small plastic case, and a folded inventory sheet with no signatures on the bottom line. Marshal Reeves lifted the pouch first. "There is a blood-stained cloth, a damaged body camera mount, and a portable drive." Emily leaned closer to the screen. "Read the label." The marshal turned it toward the camera. "Caleb Walker Supplemental Body Camera Backup, Warehouse Incident, Not Entered." The words struck Caleb harder than any accusation ever had, because they were plain. Not entered. Not lost. Not destroyed. Simply hidden where truth could gather dust. Judge Whitmore's voice cut through the line. "Play the drive." The marshal inserted it into a laptop off-screen. Seconds stretched. Rain tapped. The lights hummed. Rex pressed his head against Caleb's knee, grounding him as the monitor went dark, then filled with grainy video from the warehouse 7 years before. There was no chaos in the beginning, only the greenish glow of night vision, the shape of crates, Rex moving ahead on a lead, Caleb's voice calm and close. Then another voice came through, lower, familiar, unmistakable. "Aaron Miles." "The report is already written," the voice said. "Caleb takes the fall. The dog will not matter." In the final room, no one moved. Aaron's bag slipped from his hand and landed softly on the floor. Caleb did not look at him. He looked down at Rex, whose eyes were closed now, as if the old dog had finally heard the world say what he had known all along. The recording continued for only 23 seconds, but it was long enough to turn 7 years of certainty into dust. Aaron Miles stood behind the witness table with his empty hands at his sides, no longer reaching for the bag, no longer searching for a sentence that could save him. On the monitor, the old warehouse image trembled in green shadows. Caleb's younger voice asked where backup was. Rex barked once in the distance. Then Aaron's recorded voice came again, calm and close, saying words that made Emily Carter cover her mouth with one hand and Warden Hale lower her eyes. Judge Whitmore did not wait for the clip to end. His voice came through the speaker, sharp as morning light. "This sentence is stayed immediately. Mr. Walker is to remain in state custody for transport only, pending emergency review and evidentiary hearing. No further action is authorized." For a moment, nobody understood how to move inside a miracle. The clock changed to 5:57 in the morning, and Caleb was still breathing. That was all. That was everything. Warden Hale stepped toward him, her face no longer hidden behind procedure. "Officer Walker," she said, and her voice nearly broke on the title. "The order is in effect." Caleb looked at her as if the words had come from very far away. He had imagined many endings in 7 years, but not this one. Not the old dog at his knee. Not the rain softening against the glass. Not the truth arriving with silver on its muzzle and loyalty in its bones. A guard moved behind him, careful now, almost reverent, and removed the restraint from the chair. The small click of metal opening sounded louder than the thunder outside. Caleb did not stand. His strength left him all at once, not from weakness, but from the impossible weight of being returned to himself. He slid down to one knee beside Rex, and the German shepherd leaned into him before anyone could speak. Caleb wrapped both arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in the thick fur that smelled faintly of rain, kennel straw, and home. Rex pressed his head under Caleb's chin, just as he had done after long shifts when the world had been too heavy for words. Emily turned away, crying quietly. Chaplain Reed whispered a prayer so soft it belonged more to the room than to any one person. Warden Hale stood still with her clipboard against her chest, and for the first time in many years, she let herself witness a man not as a file, but as a soul. Across the room, Aaron was escorted out without raised voices, without spectacle, his footsteps small against the polished floor. Caleb did not watch him leave. He had spent too much of his life facing what had been taken. Now he looked only at what had stayed. His hand moved over Rex's graying head, trembling, gentle, alive. "You stayed with the truth," he whispered. Rex closed his eyes. Outside, the rain began to thin, And somewhere beyond the prison walls, dawn finally touched the road. By sunrise, Red Valley Correctional no longer looked like a place built only for endings. The rain had slowed to a silver mist, hanging over the razor wire and empty parking lot like a veil being lifted. Caleb Walker remained inside for 3 more days while lawyers, marshals, judges, and officers moved through the wreckage of the old case, gathering what had been hidden and naming what had been ignored. He did not celebrate. Not at first. Freedom, when it has been taken long enough, does not return like a parade. It returns like a weak hand learning to open again. Rex stayed in the infirmary wing with him under a special order from Warden Hale, curled on a folded blanket beside Caleb's cot, his gray muzzle resting across one boot. Every few hours, Caleb would wake and reach down just to feel the warmth of him. The dog never pulled away. Emily Carter came each afternoon with new papers in a blue folder and tired hope in her eyes. She told Caleb the federal court had ordered a full review. She told him Aaron Miles had been removed from duty pending investigation. She told him the recording, the tag, the locker, and the missing reports were enough to reopen everything. Caleb listened quietly, one hand moving over Rex's ears, not because he did not understand, but because understanding felt too large to hold all at once. On the 4th morning, under a sky washed clean by rain, Caleb walked out of Red Valley through the front gate wearing borrowed jeans, a plain gray sweatshirt, and no chains. Rex walked beside him without a leash. The old German shepherd moved slowly, his hips stiff, but his head was high. Reporters waited beyond the fence, their cameras lifted, their voices calling questions into the cold air. Caleb did not answer them. He only looked down at Rex and whispered, "Heel." The command was soft, almost private, and Rex stepped close to his left side like no time had passed at all. Emily stood by a dark sedan near the curb, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her coat. Chaplain Reed had come too, holding his worn Bible against his chest, smiling the kind of smile people wear when words are too small. Warden Hale remained by the gate, hands folded in front of her, watching the man she had nearly lost to procedure walk into the pale morning. Caleb turned back once and gave her a small nod. She returned it, and that was enough. 6 months later, the state court vacated Caleb's conviction. 1 year later, the city of Savannah issued an apology written in careful language that sounded official and not nearly sorry enough. Caleb read it once at the kitchen table of a small rented house outside Tybee Island, where sea wind pushed through the screen door and gulls cried over the marsh. Then he folded the paper and placed it in a drawer. He did not need the words to tell him who he was. Rex lay on the porch in a wide square of sunlight, chasing something gentle in his sleep, one paw twitching against the boards. His collar tag had been cleaned but not polished. Caleb had left the scratches on the back exactly as they were. 317. A number carved by instinct, patience, and the kind of loyalty that waits when every human voice has gone quiet. Beside it, on a small wooden shelf near the window, Caleb placed his marine dog tags, Rex's old police badge, and a photograph from their first year together. In the photo, Caleb was younger, smiling with one hand on Rex's back, both of them standing beside a patrol car after finding a missing child's safe behind an abandoned store. He had forgotten that version of himself existed. Rex had not. Some afternoons, Caleb took slow walks along the beach with the old dog at his side. Children would ask if they could pet him, and Caleb would kneel, guiding their hands gently to Rex's shoulder. "He is a retired officer," Caleb would say. "Be respectful." Rex accepted every small touch with patient dignity, then looked back at Caleb as if checking that the world was still safe. At night, when the house grew quiet and the ocean breathed beyond the dunes, Caleb sometimes woke from dreams of locked doors and ticking clocks. Each time, Rex was there. Not young anymore. Not strong in the way he used to be, but present. Caleb would lower his hand from the bed, and Rex would press his nose into his palm, reminding him of the truth no court could grant, and no sentence could take away. A man can be lost by the world and still be found by love. A voice can be buried and still rise. And sometimes, God does not send thunder, angels, or fire. Sometimes he sends an old German shepherd with silver around his muzzle, a memory sharper than fear, and 4 faithful paws walking slowly toward the door just before the light comes back.